Kashmir Stage Band here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat. We're talking climate change, from the UN Climate Change Summit to G20 this week and on to Copenhagen. We're joined by the New York Times reporter, science reporter, Andy Revkin here in New York. Ted Glick is with us from Washington, D.C., Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and Anna Pinto is joining us from Pittsburgh, indigenous rights activist from northeastern India. Anjali?
Anna Pinto, I wanted to ask you, you're from a region that's directly affected by climate change. Can you talk about what it's like where you are, how climate change impacts the communities where you're living, and why you're in Pittsburgh?
Well, we are in the sub-Himalayan region and in the lower slopes of the Himalayas. We're impacted primarily by two major phenomena. One is the glacial melt in the Himalayas, which exacerbates flooding. And the other is the erratic character that has developed in the monsoon rain, which also causes both drought and flash floods simultaneously. These are the two major climate events that, that impact us, and they augment each other to escalate the problem even more over the last 10 years.
And what is India planning to do to combat climate change? Can you talk about the proposal by the Indian minister yesterday at the UN? He spoke quite a bit about this.
Well, as far as I understand it, when you strip away a lot of the goodwill language, India plans to address climate change by continuing its current development trajectory. And that is not a solution. Very often, I think development is posited against climate change action, and that is a fallacy. Climate change action, effective climate change action, whether mitigation or adaptation, would go along healthy development paths, which means cutting out and reducing fossil fuel use. It means reducing high energy and high fossil fuel and highly invasive kinds of development practices. And I don't think India is going along that path at all. What India is trying to do, basically, if it's analyzed right down up to the ground, is to, in fact, expand its industrial base to take over holistic, low energy, self-sustaining, and highly sustainable forms of livelihoods from indigenous peoples, from local communities, and convert all these into a high productivity profile, which conforms to the international idea of what development is. And that is probably the biggest mistake India can make for the welfare of its own people, including, and of course, most of all, the most vulnerable people, indigenous and local communities, as well as the worst things that can be done in the context of climate change.
Can you talk, Anna Pinto, about how climate change affects migration of large populations?
Well, when your land has dried out years in succession due to drought and to annual droughts, when your land is flooded during seasons of harvest, or when the waters should actually be receding from the paddy fields, you don't have anything in terms of options except to move away, hopefully to a place where you might get a short-term or a longer-term option for livelihood. That is what is driving massive migrations throughout subcontinental, not just India, but the whole South Asia region. It's driving migration from Bangladesh into India. It's driving migration from Nepal when there are floods. It's driving migration within India all around the country. And most of the people end up in slums. They end up at the mercy of all kinds of criminal activities, including traffickers, including sex traffickers. The list of problems that is generated by bad policy and short-sighted policy, and policy that really supports the the entrenchment of rich people and their interests in the global economy is massive, and it's vicious.
Anna Pinto, very quickly, you're in Pittsburgh for the G20. Do you have any hope that the G20 is going to address the issues you're here for?
I believe that they will attempt to address some of the questions as they see them. I do not think that their perspectives will coincide with the kind of approach I'm talking about.
I want to bring Ted Glick into the conversation, Policy Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Ted, the global picture right now around climate change and what you think needs to happen as we move from the UN Climate Change Summit to the G20 meeting, and there are also mass protests outside in Pittsburgh, to Copenhagen.
Well, I thought in terms of what happened at the United Nations, one of the underreported presentations was one made by the President Mohammed Nasheed of the Maldives, where he said something to the effect that we come to these conferences, we rail against the injustices, we go back home, things cool off, and the world continues as before. And he's right. It's not that there isn't some change. There certainly are. There's more renewable energy being built and developed in various places around the world, even in the United States. There are changes that are happening, but by and large, given the seriousness and the severity of this crisis and the fact that it's here, this is not something off in the future, the response just is not sufficient. And I have to say, I include, when I say that, those who see themselves as progressive activists, as people who care about justice, as people who believe that we need to organize and mobilize to bring about change. Fortunately, there are opportunities this fall for all of us who get it, who are getting it on the severity of this and the immediacy and the urgency of it, to take action. Most immediately, October 24th is an International Day of Action being organized by 350.org. There are literally 115 countries, 1,500 actions all around the world happening on that day. That's a very important action, a very important way to keep building momentum towards Copenhagen. There's civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience happening on November 30th around the world, being organized by the Mobilization for Climate Justice. And then during the Copenhagen talks themselves, in the middle of it, on Saturday, December 12th, is a global day of action being organized by the Global Climate Campaign, the Global Campaign for Climate Action, and many other groups. So there are major opportunities from the grassroots, from below, to bring the kind of pressure that absolutely needs to be brought. There is movement. There has been movement on this issue for years, including in the United States, but it's absolutely time to step it up and to magnify it and intensify it.
And the position of the U.S. Congress and the Obama administration, Ted Glick?
Well, the Obama administration certainly gets the issue in a way that the Bush administration did not. There's no question that some things are happening that are positive. The problem is that the U.S. Congress continues to be a stronghold of coal interests and oil interests. You know, coal and oil has a major stranglehold over Capitol Hill. And again, that's why mobilization is critical. We're not going to solve this problem unless we can break that stranglehold, unless we can get the kind of legislation that really begins to move us seriously off of coal, ends the building of any new coal plants, gets us onto a clean energy trajectory.